Hi, everybody. Thank you, first of all, so much for joining and participating in this bake-along. It's my first, basically, so hopefully this will be one of many. Today, every donation, monetary donation, should you guys decide to tip, you don't have to. I want you to just be here and learn and be excited about food. But should you decide, all the proceeds are going to go to the Okra Project, which serves the Black trans community, and they provide food services for them. So it's the bridge between racial justice and equity and food justice and food equity. So it's exactly on brand with what we're trying to do and what I hope to do for the rest of my career in life. That all being said, today we are going to make a chocolate curry cake with a whipped chocolate ganache filling and frosting, okay? So before we even get started, I'm going to introduce you guys to three of my favorite tools in the kitchen, and these are my best friends, and they are not expensive, and I feel like everyone should have them. The first one is your oven thermometer, because despite the fact that my oven tells me my oven is at 350 degrees, it's often at 300, so this helps me make sure that it's actually at the right temp. Very critical for baking. Other, bench scraper. This is your best friend. It helps clean up, it helps mix batters, it helps you do a lot of things. When you want to fold, this is actually your best friend, and it also feels great on your skin, just saying. Third, scale. You want a digital scale, something that toggles between grams and ounces, kilos, pounds, whatever form of measurement that you use. This is another one of your best friends.
Before you begin, we just did have one question. How would you like people to tip you? Should they give a donation straight to the Okra Project or send you a Venmo or?
You could do straight to the project in your own name and account if you don't want to give it to me. Otherwise, I will provide my Venmo and PayPal at the end of this. I'll add it to the Facebook invite so that way you guys have access to it. And any other sort of logistical questions I will be addressing there after this. Okay, so very first thing that we want to do before we even touch any of our ingredients, we want to get our pans ready. So I already have one set up here. I have sprayed it with non-stick spray, and then I also use some parchment paper to line the bottom. This way it ensures that the cake will not stick to the pan. But I'm gonna show you guys how to do that. There are two methods to do it. This is one, and then the other one is your classic butter flour or butter cocoa, okay? So when I measure out my parchment paper, it comes in this rectangular tube, obviously, and it's not a circle. So I just open it up, measure it against the pan, and then rip it. And this is what I do to get my circles. So I'm gonna move this out of the way. We're just gonna fold it into a rectangle. And then we're gonna fold it over into another rectangle, okay? And then we're gonna turn it so that the crease is right here. These are our two creases, and we wanna always fold towards the crease. So we're gonna make a triangle, and then another triangle, and one more, okay? Then we're gonna take our pan, flip it upside down, measure from the center point to the edge, and this is where we're gonna cut, and that'll give me a circle. So grab my scissors, just gonna cut around here. It doesn't have to be exact to the bottom, but with that, you get this super cute little circle, and you can use right in your pan. How's that? Super easy. All right, so let's spray this one. Sprayed with non-stick spray, lined in the bottom, good to go. Okay, we got two down, we're gonna do one more. This last one I'm gonna do with the traditional technique, which is just butter. And for chocolate cakes, I always use cocoa powder because if you use flour, it's gonna bake white and it just looks really weird on a cake unless you're gonna add powdered sugar or something. I'm a very tactile person. I really enjoy just touching food because that also makes sure that it gets into all the creases. Honestly, if you have extra butter on the cake, it's not gonna taste bad. It's gonna be really delicious, and it'll actually caramelize and add another crunch texture to the outside of your crust, which is really, really nice. This is also why I always have a towel on my shoulder so that I can get anything that's on my fingers off my fingers so I can keep using my hands. Just gonna sprinkle a little cocoa powder in here. And you wanna kind of tap it pretty hard because you just wanna get all the loose cocoa off. And then you're just gonna twist it around. I don't know if you can, let me just make sure you see what I'm doing. I'm gonna get it as far to the edges as possible. This is if you don't have parchment paper, this is a good alternative, and that's it. You're good to go. So your pans are set, turn on your oven, make sure it's at 350 and it's preheating so that while we're preparing all our ingredients, everything's gonna be set. These can be set to the side until we're ready to use them. If you are like me and you do not have buttermilk, which the recipe calls for, you can curdle any form of milk or dairy. I do it with coconut milk, I've done it with oat milk, I've done it with pea protein, I've done it with soy milk, I've done it with literally everything that you could imagine. So the first thing I want to do is get that ready so that by the time that I'm ready to mix my wet ingredients, it's already curdled and ready to go. So on the bottom of my measuring cup, I have 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, and the recipe calls for 1 cup of buttermilk. So now I'm just gonna add, I have 2% milk. I'm gonna add that and I'm gonna mix it. The higher fat content, the better it's gonna be in terms of flavor and the better it will curdle. You can already see that it's already starting to curdle. Like it's basically curdling. There's no better way to describe it except it gets chunky, which is really gross, but it's actually exactly what we're looking for because we're trying to create an acid which is gonna react with all the dry ingredients and give rise to our bake. Okay, that's set aside. We will use that later. Now for the exciting part of making our curry. In my frying pan, I have turmeric. I have, let's see if I can remember all of them just from sight. Turmeric, black pepper, I have cumin seeds. These are all cinnamon, cardamom, coriander, mustard seed, ground anise, and ground ginger. You can really substitute, change, omit, however you like. It really is kind of just like a dealer's choice. I happen to like all of these ingredients, and if one of them kind of doesn't speak to you, what I suggest is just use a small amount and mix it all up because it's not going to be a standalone. You're really trying to create harmony between a lot of different flavors. So all we're going to do is we're going to turn this on, and we want it to be on a lower temp. And we're just going to mix them around, and we want to toast them. So like with the powders, you're really trying to wake them up because they're essentially like dried and they're sitting on your shelf. So we're trying to like toast them to wake them up to get a really fragrant, strong smell. For the seeds, what you're doing is you're releasing all the oils. So it doesn't take long. And especially with the ground spices, it takes maybe a minute at most. And you'll start to smell it. Just gonna mix it around. You wanna keep it moving because it'll basically get too hot in one spot and we don't want that. It already smells really, really amazing. If you don't have a spice grinder, then use all powdered. If you don't have a mortar and pestle, which by the way, mortar and pestle, you'll probably still have to sift it afterwards because it's not gonna be a fine grind, which is what you're looking for. And honestly, if you don't mind that texture biting in between your teeth when you're having cake, that's fine. But I feel like your expectation is that it's gonna be something soft. It shouldn't be like a hard, crunchy peppercorn or something like that, unless that's something you want. It's already starting to smoke, and I know it's done, okay? So from here, it's gonna get transferred directly into my spice grinder. Let me turn that off. And this is gonna create like a pretty good amount, so you won't have to do this process for a while again. Also, if you're using turmeric, I give you a word of warning, it stains everything, so you really don't want to use it when you're wearing something white or you're using anything white unless you don't care that it turns into bright gold. Okay, it's actually a beautiful color, but if it's not what you want, you don't want it on there. The curry is done. Now we're gonna get together our dry ingredients for our cake. For dry ingredients, I already have it all meased out and put together here. I actually do it this way, not just because I'm like recording a video, but this way I have a visual cue of all the things that I've already included in my mix. That way I know immediately if I'm missing something. So I have 400 grams of sugar. I have 300 grams of flour. I don't remember exactly. It's in the recipe. I provided it. I'll send it again if y'all need it. I have 2 tablespoons of curry. I actually tried running this recipe earlier and I found that 2 tablespoons was a really good amount for this amount of dries. I have 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and baking soda, a teaspoon of salt, and then 85 grams of cocoa powder. That's all my dries, okay? I'm just gonna blend them together. The beautiful thing about this cake, I don't have to sift anything because at the very end, after we add all our wets, we're gonna actually add a cup of boiling water, and that loosens the batter immediately. It becomes very soupy, and it allows for a much bigger sponge. So like it has like more expansive holes in it for as a reaction, I believe. For our wets, I want to actually go ahead and put a cup of water to boil because I'm gonna need it at the very end. So I'm just gonna put that on the side. I have half a cup of vegetable oil. You can use any neutral oil. I don't recommend olive oil or things that have like a really strong flavor because it'll impact the flavor of the cake. We're gonna do 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And you can really use any vanilla you want. I have this like Jamaican vanilla. It's really delicious. Caribbean vanilla is actually really, really good and very strong. We have 2 eggs. And now we have our milk that is now very effectively curdled. Okay, that's all gonna go in there. I know that doesn't look very appetizing, but it's gonna be real delicious, I promise. We're just gonna whisk this all together. And when we're whisking, what I'm looking for is that it all becomes one homogeneous mixture. So like there's no separation between any oils, any milk, any eggs. I want it all to look the same.
Fadi, we do have a question in the chat for you. So the question is, if they only have Dutch cocoa powder, not natural, is that okay? And does cocoa powder expire?
Cocoa powder, as far as I know, does not expire. The thing with most dry spices is that they're usually great for up to a year, and then after a year, they just become very dull in flavor and they become very muddled. So that might be the risk that you're encountering, is that it's just not gonna be as strong as of a flavor, but it doesn't matter what cocoa you have, as long as you like it, that's all that matters.
And the other question is baking pans. If they don't have cake pans, can they use a cupcake tin, a 9x13 glass baking dish, or metal baking dish?
Absolutely.
I will say with glass baking dishes, though, I can tell you from experience, be careful because they can explode.
So that's one answer that I was gonna say for sure. Be careful with glass. They can explode, as Casey has experienced many a times.
Okay, not many. Excuse me.
But yeah, you can basically divide this better. So I actually am gonna show a previously baked 8-inch cake. And then this is actually gonna go into a 6-inch cake. The only thing that's gonna differ is your baking time. So I would say, if you know what you're gonna bake in, ask me about it and I will probably be able to guide you. But I would say as a rule of thumb, the smaller it is, obviously the faster it's gonna bake. So if you're gonna bake cupcakes, I would say check your cupcakes after 10 minutes. And it should be like your standard toothpick, comes out clean, done, okay? But you don't wanna go longer than that. So at this stage, my wet mixture is actually exactly how I want it. It's completely combined. There's some separation with the oil, but that's not a big deal. We're gonna go ahead and just pour that right in. Spatula. Make sure we get it all in. And for the first step, I'm actually gonna mix it with the spatula because it's gonna get really thick. And then after I get this well mixed, I'm gonna go ahead and add the boiling water, which is gonna thin out this entire batter. So this is known as like a homemade quote unquote box mix because it's very similar in texture to like your box cakes. But obviously it's made from scratch. It's gonna taste a lot better. You know exactly what's going into it. There's no preservatives, there's nothing like that. I can already smell the curry. And at this stage, what I would suggest, especially if you're gonna be using any sort of spices in your batters, that you actually bring it up to your face and you smell it. If you cannot smell the seasoning that you've put in there, there's probably not enough. Now, the good news is, if you proceed and go ahead and bake it and it's still not a very strong flavor for you, that's fine. You can always reinforce the flavor in your frostings, okay? You can never take away. So if it's too strong of a flavor, you can't reduce it. But if it's too weak of a flavor, you can always add to it, okay? So I'm gonna actually, I can actually smell the curry already, so I'm not gonna go ahead and put my face in there, but I do it all the time because it gets me really excited that it's actually like it gets my palate prepared for what I want. So here's my cup of boiling water. I'm just gonna go ahead and pour that directly in there. And I use the same measuring cup because that way it picks up whatever was left behind before. I'm gonna start just working this in little by little with my whisk, because if you go too fast at this stage, you will spill boiling water out onto your table and possibly onto you, which we wanna avoid. And we're just gonna work it in slowly. And it should be this beautiful, thin, shiny batter texture. And that's exactly what we got. Our cake batter is ready to go. So now we'll go and grab our prepared pans. So if you want to divvy up your batter, there's obviously ways that you could do that. You already have like a dirty measuring cup. You could just pour 2 cups and then just pour it into each pan. Or you could weigh it, so that way you know exactly how much is going into each one. I'm just gonna do it because I don't really feel like weighing it. I'm just gonna do the old school method. This is what my mom would do. Actually, honestly, I don't think my mom ever used measuring cups. Like, that woman just knew what she was doing. She just felt it, she had a gut, she followed through, and then it never, well, I don't know that it never didn't work out, but if it didn't work out, we didn't know about it. So she was a crafty lady, I'll tell you that. So this is about like 2 cups in each pan, which is about what I expected. And just a tip, if you're gonna use measurements like grams, I actually have the measurement of my aluminum bowls written on the outside of the bowl in Sharpie. That way, if I forget to like measure, where is it? See, like right here, it actually says the weight of the bowl. That way, if I forget to measure the weight of the bowl to subtract it from the batter, I already know exactly how much my bowl weighs so that I can subtract it and then do a proper distribution of weight. Okay, our cakes are done. They're gonna go into the oven now at 350 for about, I would say 20 minutes, and then I would check again. For the 6-inch pans, because they're smaller and they're gonna be like taller cakes, they're probably gonna take around 30 minutes, that's my guess. But I usually check them at around 20 and then determine from there where I wanna go with them. So I'm gonna go pop these in, I'll be right back.
Fadi, before you continue, do you know how many cupcakes this batter, the recipe that you have, will make?
Honestly, I would guess at least 2 dozen. I'm trying to think if I've ever made this into cupcakes. I don't think that I have, only because I'm not a huge fan of cupcakes. I prefer stacked cakes, but that's just personal preference. So let's assume the cakes have been in the oven, they've been baking for 20 minutes, and then by some miracle and magic, they just appear, ta-da! The cakes that just went in the oven were 6 inches, these are 8 inches, the same, exact same batter, except these are vegan. So I decided to make a vegan version, but whatever, that's neither here nor there, okay? So before I actually start stacking the cakes, I wanna talk about ganache, okay? So for chocolate ganache, if you want a very thin ganache, you just want equal parts of chocolate and whatever sort of cream you're using. So I've done, for my vegan stuff, I do coconut milk, which works beautifully. And for my non-vegan, I try to err towards heavy cream because the fat content just really makes it that much nicer. In this bowl, I don't even have 8 ounces. I just have what's left over. I have about, I think, 2 ounces in here. I just want to demonstrate what you're looking for. So this is 2 ounces of heavy cream. I'm just gonna bring this to a simmer and then pour it right on top. And then while this is settling and melting, then I'm gonna start stacking my cakes. That way, like, I don't have any idle time. To remove the cakes from the pans, there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can take a offset spatula or a sharp knife, just run it along the edge. If you're a baker who sells cakes, you probably have round pieces of cardboard that you can put on top of the cake pan and flip it over. But if you're a home baker and you're not interested in selling your cakes, then I will introduce you to what I was doing for many, many, many years before I actually discovered the joys and ease of cardboard cutouts. I would just take a regular dinner plate and put some cling wrap on it or aluminum foil. If you want to be environmentally friendly, you don't need to use this. I just do it because that basically means less dishes for me. And then you're gonna just put it on top of the cake pan, and then you flip the cake pan over, okay? And it should just come right out, all right? So now you have an upside down cake. Take another plate, same situation, and we're just gonna put it on top and then flip it over, and now it's right side up. At this stage, you can actually frost it directly onto a plate. So if you don't want to even bother with like a cake stand or something like that, you can put it directly on a plate. I am going to put it on here because I'm basically going to cut it up and distribute it right afterwards. Or this is my cake saver. So like I could actually stack and build my cake on my cake saver. That way I'm not making a ton of dishes. I'm going to actually go ahead, transfer it over here. And I'm putting it upside down so that I can have the flattest surface to work with. That way I also don't have to bother leveling a cake, which used to really, really intimidate me until I got like a proper tool for it. And then that really changed my life. All right, so we're gonna do it for this one too. Same deal. And you can see like how spongy that cake is. It's just, it really is one of my favorite chocolate cake recipes. So here's my other trick about stacking a cake. So if you don't have a cake turner to spin the cake, but you do have a Lazy Susan, again, this is what I was doing for many years. When I didn't have equipment, didn't know about equipment, I would just jerry rig one. So this is my Lazy Susan. And then I just have like cut this like non-stick silicone thing. I'm gonna take one of the cake pans that I baked in. I'm just gonna flip it upside down. I'm gonna put another one right here. That way that secures this. And then I'm just gonna put my cake right on top. And now I have a cake turner. Our cream has now simmered. I'm gonna bring my chocolate chips, pour my simmered cream on top. And then I'm gonna let that sit just for a few minutes until it gets super melty. The smaller chips are gonna melt a lot faster, obviously, but I mean, I've used full chocolate blocks and it works just fine. Just gonna start whisking that to get it to melt. And it'll look really soupy at first, but eventually it'll come together. You can also season this if you'd like. For chocolate ganache, when you're making like a thin ganache, I'm gonna actually bring this closer to the camera. Once you get to this stage of like really shiny and thin, you kind of want to stop here. You don't really want to go any further because you can break it. If you break it, what that basically means is you start developing a texture in there that isn't smooth. If that happens, it's a super easy fix. Just take whatever dairy or cream or liquid you use to liquefy this and add just like a little bit of it and mix it right back in and it'll smooth it out. So from here, you have two options with your ganache. You can use it just like this, okay? You can just pour it directly onto your cake and then you have like this delicious chocolate ganache, like melty situation. Or you can put it in, if you have a stand mixer, put it in your stand mixer or use an electric hand mixer and just mix it for about, it takes a minute, like 15 minutes, and you get whipped chocolate ganache, okay? Whipped chocolate ganache is basically the exact same thing, except what we've done is we've whipped a lot of air into it, and we've cooled it down, and we've allowed the fats to re-solidify, and so it gives us more of a texture of like a spreadable frosting, something you could pipe, something you could just like spoon onto a dessert, or something like that, okay? Now, I have actually gone ahead and done that. It goes from this to this. And this is basically a very firm, pipeable chocolate. It's almost like the texture of chocolate mousse. So I actually added 1 to 2 teaspoons of orange zest into this to give just another flavor. You don't have to do that, it's totally optional, but you could use any citrus zest if you'd like. It adds just another dimension of flavor, and actually citrus and curries go really well together. There's something about the acidity that counteracts the earthiness of a curry. Very often you'll eat curry and then you'll have like some sort of like citrus fruit, like pineapple or lemon or lime or something to cut through that flavor and bring it up, okay? So don't ever hesitate to experiment. That's always my best advice. I'm just gonna go ahead and plop down some of my whipped chocolate ganache. I'm gonna spread it on the cake. I don't really measure this part, I just kind of go by eye, but you can actually do half a cup at a time. And if you don't like this texture, you can actually just put it right back in the microwave and it'll go back to its liquid form. So you can use the same thing to do whatever you'd like. So this is a good way to fill your cake. And then the other way is a good way to cover your cake if it's thinner and looser. I'm just gonna go ahead and turn that over. You can do this also with a piping bag if you don't feel comfortable actually doing this. You can use an ice cream scoop and scoop out 1 to 2, 3, however many scoops you want in between. That way you're making sure that it's the same in between each level. Sometimes I can be a real perfectionist. Most of the times I'm just kind of playing with food, really. So whatever really brings you happiness, that's kind of the goal. From this point, I'm gonna keep covering it up and get all the sides. But then after I'm done with all of that, what I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna take the liquid ganache and whatever's left over of the whipped ganache, I'm gonna melt it back down and just pour it directly onto the cake. So that basically you have 3 layers of chocolate onto each other. You can decorate it by piping some, you could add like nuts to it, you could add candy, you could do really whatever you'd like with that.
Fadi, can we see a side view of the cake?
Yeah, so I did this really fast. It obviously still needs a lot of coverage. Obviously, if as you're working in the summer, your kitchen gets too hot, feel free to stop what you're doing, put it back in the fridge until it hardens again. What I'm doing right now would actually be still considered the crumb coat, or some people call it dirty frosting, because you basically get these crumbs inside. What we do is we actually do a very thin layer of frosting first, we pop it back in the fridge, and then we do another layer of frosting, and then we decorate on top of that. That way we make sure we have really clean, smooth surfaces to work with. There's no bumps, or at least we minimize the amount of bumps and dents and imperfections in the cake.
Fadi, do you find that you typically need to bake longer for vegan versions of your cake?
Not particularly, it's usually the same. The trick with converting a traditional recipe into a vegan recipe is understanding the mechanics of every ingredient. Why is it present? Okay, so like for instance, for this cake, I'll give you guys the tip since you guys are my first people supporting me and such. So this cake requires 2 eggs, right? Traditionally, eggs are obviously protein, so they add protein structure, okay? In this cake, every egg is like a large egg. The liquid inside the protein is about 50 grams of liquid. I actually replace the 2 eggs with just 100 grams of water, and it works just fine. Because for whatever reason, I think there's enough gluten in the cake that it actually holds its structure without the need for the egg protein. And just to like give you an update, here's like what the cake actually looks like now. So we've got some like good coverage on the sides. At this stage, I would probably pop it back in the fridge, and then I would melt this, and that's actually exactly what I'm gonna do since we have time. I'm gonna go ahead and do that.
And so T would like to know, is there something you would never want to do with chocolate?
What would I never want to do with chocolate? Chocolate and seafood.
Oh,
not happening.
Well, that's a good question. Follow up to the next one. What flavor to never add with chocolate? And what's a story about your best cake fail?
I tested a sauerkraut chocolate cake, which actually, okay. I'm gonna revisit that cake because there was potential there. The texture was out of this world. It was super soft, really fluffy, and yet really firm. Like it had the density of a pound cake, but the fluffiness of a sponge. It was the weirdest thing ever. But unfortunately, the sauerkraut flavor came out way too strong, and it just was not a very pleasant combination. The worst combination I've ever had, this was back before I developed my shellfish allergy. I actually had shrimp and chocolate because it was mole inspired, and it was the worst thing I've ever put in my mouth. Like, it was, no. Leave mole to the Oaxacans, okay? Let them do their thing. They know what they're doing. Don't put it with shellfish.
Who would be like the #1 person you would want to bake for, celebrity or not?
Okay, my immediate answer, and this is just me being the sap that I am, I've never, ever had the chance to bake for my mom, and I really want to bake for her. Like that to me, like literally, I would book a ticket to Jordan tomorrow, and even if I had like just enough time to serve her a dish. This is what I have here. I can actually show you here. This is the remainder of the whipped ganache. I'm actually just gonna pop it in the microwave for like 30 seconds just to like liquefy it. And then I'm gonna pour it on top of the cake that we just frosted. So, I mean, it's kind of like ridiculous that it takes you 15 minutes to whip chocolate ganache to get to that stable state, and then it takes 30 seconds to get it back to liquid. So it kind of makes you feel like, why did I even bother doing that? But honestly, the texture is so incredible. And if you have a stand mixer, it's really no work. You're just popping it in there and letting it do its thing. If you have an electric mixer, it's obviously work because you have to stand there and hold the thing and move it around. But having had an electric mixer for most of my baking, it's totally worth it. The results speak for themselves and the flavor is really unmatched. So 30 seconds, I'm gonna bring it here because I don't wanna spill, but 30 seconds in the microwave and it brought it right back to its liquid state.
What speed do you recommend whipping the ganache on a stand mixer?
I would start low because it's liquid, so it'll splatter everywhere. And then once it starts to like at around, I want to say like 5 to 10 minutes, it'll start to like solidify. And then you can like increase the speed up. Basically, like if you're doing a vegan version, like this is actually vegan, what's on the cake right now. Coconut milk doesn't have the same fats, obviously, as milk. If you're using heavy cream, I mean, heavy cream is the basis of whipping cream. So like the more you whip air into it, the firmer it's gonna get. But with this, it'll only develop soft peaks when it's at room temp. So you're gonna wanna put it in the fridge for a good 30 minutes at least so that it becomes workable and pipeable. Here's our liquid ganache. And then I'm just gonna pour it right on top of the cake. You can kind of just let it run its course, do its thing, or you could like help it along the way. And I'm not looking for full coverage with this liquid ganache. I'm just kind of adding another element. And that way I'm also not wasting any of my ingredients. If you wanted, you could use the liquid ganache and then just put it in a bottle and just like squeeze it around the edges. And then you develop that drip effect, which I can show you right now. So like, you can see all around. I don't necessarily feel the need to cover my cakes entirely. I feel like there's enough sweetness in them that this is sufficient. So then from this point, I'll just pop it back in the fridge, let all the chocolate harden, and then it's ready to cut and serve. And that's it. You got your orange zest chocolate ganache curry chocolate cake. The cakes have been baking for 30 minutes now, and they're still not coming out clean. Because it's a 6-inch cake, it's probably gonna be around 35 to 40 minutes now that I'm seeing that. But based on like this, it's telling me about like 5 more minutes and it should be done. Cupcakes will go a lot faster. I would guess that cupcakes would probably take around 15 to 20 minutes. So and also this is another tip that I learned while like starting to bake in bigger quantities. Always rotate your pans, okay? Every oven, including convection ovens, have hot spots. Yes, convection was designed to circulate air in multiple ways so that it's going up and down and sideways, but even then you're still gonna have hot spots. So when I say rotate, this is what I mean. So like say this is my cake or my cupcake pan, I actually mean like literally pull it out of the oven, turn it around, and find a new location for it. So if you have like 3 pans, and I do this all the time, so like they're like this in the oven typically. I rotate 180 and then they go in opposite directions. So they get rotated twice. So it's like a cycle. That way you're basically getting them to bake from all sides as evenly as possible for the same amount of time. If, however, when you open the oven and you touch the rack and the centers of the cake are literally liquid and they just move like this, don't move them. That will collapse your cakes, okay? Wait until they actually develop a crust, then you can rotate them. So it may not be in the middle of the bake and maybe just past the middle point, but you do not want, and you'll know when you did that wrong, because when the cakes come out, they'll be like dipped in, they'll be like concave in the middle. What happened was you let out too much hot air and you moved them, you touched them too much. Just remember, every time you open the oven, 10% of the heat escapes. So you don't want to do that often. That's also another reason why you always want the oven thermometer in there.
Another question, how long do you think the bake would be for a 9x13 pan?
You know what? I'm actually gonna look it up right now. I have, this is my baking binder. It's massive. But I also have like conversions in here. It's gonna be about 30 to 35 minutes. Yeah, I would check at around like 20 minutes, but it'll probably be the same thing with like the 6-inch pans. Okay, folks, our babies are done. Ta-da! You know, these very beautiful, and they are This is what I love about 6-inch pans, is that the cakes just come out so thick that they're very easy to slice into two, so you can very easily create a 6-layer cake. And that's it, we're done. Now I have a lot of cakes that I'm gonna go donate. If you would like to nominate somebody, as I suggested, you can DM me their information, just like the who and the why. And this is something that's going to be ongoing, whether I'm doing Zoom classes or not. I'm going to be baking and giving people treats. This is actually a part of hopefully my bigger business plan, is I always want to have at least once a month. Hopefully, if I'm very successful, at least once a week, maybe eventually once a day, where we could do a raffle and a drawing, and somebody can just, you know, buy yourself a treat and buy somebody else a treat for free. You know, why not, right? We all deserve a little bit of luxury in our lives. And right now, Lord knows we could all use a little pick-me-up. So I hope that that's what this did for you today. And I hope you come back and you tell your friends. And I look forward to seeing you all again.